Um, I mean, that is very much something that I like to hear. And when I was running schools, those are the kind of things that I try to sneak in, kind of against all this. And I know a lot of the teachers that I know, they think the same as that. And but do you think that there are also kind of deeper shifts that are required? Education is one, but a lot of the kind of social arrangements that we're familiar with and kind of live within were based on that earlier model of the early dying early and having very little going on once you're old age, and things like marriage and the way that those things were arranged and the way that you had when you had to marry and when you had to make these relationships work and the kind of all that kind of stuff. It seems to be that if you've got another 30-40 years of active life, especially if it's 30-40 years of active life where you're doing the things that you suddenly want to do, so you're more likely to be a nicer or feel better about yourself in this latter bit than the drudgery of working for the man, if you like, that you've done for the previous 30 years. I'm wondering whether that one creates an issue around the kind of social structures that you live in, whether they need to be much more flexible and change. And secondly, politics. How does power organize itself around these people that you can't threaten with sacking or making their lives miserable, because they're in a sense they're anarchists. They're out there. There's nobody telling you what you can do now. You could, Professor Alan Macfarlane can do what he likes because he's got his bar, he's got his books, he's got his international connections. I mean, you're kind of footloose and fancy free in that respect. And I suppose if you're wanting political power, you want to organize power, I'm wondering whether the structures that you've got are adequate for this new age.
Well, both those are good questions. I'll answer them fairly briefly, though. The marriage one is very interesting because before, on the whole, marriage was for the simple purpose of bringing up children and running a household and so on. And once the children had left home, the central core of it had partly vanished. And the famous 17th century saying that marriage is an institution, women are mistresses for young age, companions for middle age, and nurses for old age. Now this is a big problem because they're going to be nurses for a lot longer than they were. But it also means that the sort of person who was suitable at one age, the ideal partner for your working life, might not be the partner for your old age. This is a real problem in Japan, particularly, because you have famously the intensive life of the salaryman. You marry in Japan traditionally, and the wife hardly sees the husband because he's away in the office and comes back exhausted. And so he's just sort of a marginal figure. And then many Japanese marriages break up when the man retires because he doesn't have any interests or hobbies. And he's known as the wet leaf, which is a wet leaf that falls on your shoulder. And you can't try and shake it off. You're going off to see your ikebana lady friends for your club. And there's your husband saying, "Can I come too?"
Right.
And so many Japanese marriages are really problematic after retirement. And that, I think, I haven't seen studies of this, but I imagine there may be some feature of this, that people really realize how far apart they are when they become retired because they had the children and they had different careers. And then when they're thrown together hour after hour after hour, unless they've become very close or they have shared interests, that is always the solution I give to my young friends when I'm talking to them, when they're talking about getting married. I say, make sure that the person you're marrying is going to be a friend. The English have married friends, and a friend with whom you can engage in multiple kinds of joint activity. You can discuss things. You like plays and films and poetry, and you swap novels, or you like going on holidays to the same sort of places, so that you'll have as it were, projects, joint projects, which you can develop in retirement. I mean, in my personal case with Sarah, the real joy of, and why my retirement in the last 12 years has been the happiest period in my life. We've been together all the time. We were pretty much before, but all the time. And it's been refreshed by constant new challenges and projects, learning about China, going to this place, going to that, studying my ancestors, writing books, whatever it is. So we have explored the world together. If you do that, then the marriage will go on. But if it was founded on rather weaker foundations, there's a real danger that we will move to a model where you have different women or men for different stages in your life.
Mm.
And that, to me, is sad, but that may be a tendency. So I think marriage really has to be carefully looked at, the structural problems it'll face with this kind of third and fourth age, because the third age is when you are active and so on until your 80s intellectually. The fourth age is when you need support and help. And that, of course, is something that society has got to think about a lot, you know, in your 90s and whenever, you know, your mind's still all right and so on, but you're frail and you need some sort of support. The political fragmentation caused by the fact that you've got all these, the grey vote, I think they're called, or the hairless vote would be more appropriate, is part of a much wider problem, which is that politicians and so on have now less and less hold on the electorate, because many people are not in sort of institutional factory or other jobs. They are freelance, and therefore the government has very little. They're not just, you know, the sort of Deliveroo or Uber people, but many people, and this will be an increasing tendency. So you basically can't get at them through institutions. And more people will be able to, as wealth grows and so on, be economically independent of the government. They don't depend on it. And therefore there's very little hold. And that's exacerbated obviously by social media, by the fact that before you could be manipulated by governments through newspapers and television and so on. They controlled the mass media. Now the mass media have become the micro media, and every individual is free to explore what they want. And this leads to this hyper fragmentation of politics into smaller groups and smaller interests, and people going their own way and so on and so on. And that obviously feeds into a kind of politics that you see in America and many parts of the world, which you have a leader who tries to unite people through demagoguery and authoritarian and utopian pleas, and temporarily gives them a vision of something that unites them, often hatred against something else. But it's very fragmentary because it can't last more than a few months or years, and then whatever it was, the hatred or the vision that united them disappears, and then they're all fragments again. So it's part of a bigger problem there. But perhaps I can end these thoughts about the third age and how important it is, just by mentioning that for me, and this is a note of cheer to people, I was never frightened of the third age. I looked forward to it. I often thought about how it'd be nice to have more time. And this wasn't because I wasn't enjoying my job. I was enjoying it, but there were parts of it I enjoyed more than others. I enjoyed the research and the writing and the traveling and meeting people more than some of the committee work, administration, and a bit of the teaching, which was quite stressful. So retirement for me was not less work. It's probably more work in the sense of mental activity.
Right.
But it was at my own pace and in the directions I want to go in. So it For quite a lot of academics, it's a very difficult time. They've given their life to the job, and when they retire, they feel it's a loss. A few sensible ones go off and do something entirely different, like painting or whatever. But a number of them, like Ernest Gellner, didn't really enjoy retirement. I used to meet him and ask him why he looked so unwell. And he said, Alan, I'm so tired. I work all the time. And I said, why? And he said, to stop me thinking. Or, you know, he was just compulsive. And a number of academics I know, they do the compulsive academic work too much when they retire because there's no limit to it. I can't remember whether I mentioned the joke, but I'll mention it again here because it sums it all up. A joke, the last bit in my supervisor Keith Thomas's book on the Oxford Book of Verse, the last quotation is from an Oxford academic who was asked what he thought of retirement. And he said, oh, well, it's all right, but I do miss the sabbaticals.
Yeah.
The rests, the alternation. So what you have to do, in my advice to people who are retiring, either academics or others, make sure that the life is very varied. You don't do the same thing all. Limit stressful bits if you're a writer or a creator, or you know, keep it in limits, check it, because otherwise it can get out of hand. You know, Sarah has to stop me sometimes, I have to stop Sarah, but basically, but if you do that, then it's absolutely wonderful. And it's wonderful, particularly for me, and I'll end on this little note of tribute. One sad thing about retirement as an academic, and in many jobs, is that you suddenly discover that you weren't loved for yourself alone, as Yeats put it, but for your golden hair. Only God, my dear, could love you for yourself, but not your golden hair. And in this case, you're not loved for yourself, but for your job and position. So the moment you retire as an academic, the journals you were writing for, or the publishers you were writing for, who you would say, I've got a new book, and they would whiz down from London and say, now, Alan, tell me about this. You know, they say, oh, how interesting, Alan. Next time I'm in Cambridge, I'll let you know. So we'll call you and don't call us. So my regular publishers stopped publishing me. They would either, you know, just reject it, or they just make so many requests, particularly saying, you know, you're not up to date, you know, put in lots of new references to all this stuff that's coming out, which of course I couldn't because I wasn't bothering to keep up with it. So they had grounds for rejecting it. But anyway, I set up my own publishing house, and I found Amazon and so on and so on. So it didn't worry me, but many academics suddenly find that their main form of communication is cut off, which is quite undermining. And the other thing that is cut off is their contact with young people, because the wonderful thing about both teaching and university's life, as Peter Burke put it, is that every year you start with a fresh group of young minds, the great privilege of encountering hopeful and young and energetic people, often very creative and intelligent. That suddenly, well, doesn't necessarily suddenly stop, because many of my friends go on doing a bit of teaching and so on, but it goes away. Now, that is also exacerbated by an English feature, which is that we don't have much respect for age. And as part of this feature of English society, you know, once you are old, you're very, very old. You know, if someone had said to me, Alan, you will one day be nearly 80, I would have said, good God, how old can you get? And, you know, you humor your grandparents and very elderly people, but you don't really take them very seriously. And you wouldn't expect to spend much time sort of having good conversations with them, because they don't know the sort of stuff you're interested in. The wonderful thing for me about working in China, and to a certain extent in Japan, is that it's an old age culture. Because of the Confucian respect for wisdom and old age, your parents and grandparents are the really wise people. They have absorbed life. They know the world. And so you have a really deep respect both for your teachers and for old people. And this means that my friends now, 60, 70% of my email contacts are with Chinese, young Chinese. I mean, by young, I mean under the age of 50. But also, students and people at university and so on. And they treat you with the secret marks of respect. They want to know about you, and they're interested in what you say, and they will provide help and advice and so on if you need it. So you suddenly, for me anyway, a whole new set of friends and friendships have developed through travels to China and so on, and I would finally suggest that to those who are thinking about old age. Many people now have the money and they will have the time when they retire to travel. And if you travel not in this sort of even the Swans Hellenic sort of cultural tour thing, which that's good enough. But basically, if you travel in the sensible way of which is go to a country and learn a bit about it and spend some months there and make friends and get within the skin of the culture, you will probably make friends of an enduring kind because people in those countries particularly value a friendship with the West. And so each time you will garner one or two friends, and the tragedy of old age, which is that your lifelong friends die off. Each year you have two or three of people you've known for a very long time die. And it's difficult for many people to replenish that. The way I found of replenishing it is through these much younger friendships, which give you great delight. So on that happy note,
Well, having